Welcome back, and thank you so much for staying with this South African morning. My name is Cindy Mabi. Now, rolling blackouts continue to be the bane of most of the economy, but government is saying that some help is on the way, especially for farmers in them to access alternative energy sources. Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development Minister Togo Didiza has announced an agro-energy fund to the tune of R2.5 billion. For more on this, we are now joined by the Director General in the Agriculture Department, Mooketsa Ramasodi. DG, thank you so much for your time and good morning. Just to unpack this fund, especially the criteria of farmers who may need this particular alternative fund.
Good morning, Wakamabe Dumela, and to the viewers too. We have got the Agro Energy Fund. It has got 3 categories. And one of those categories is large-scale farmers who will qualify for a 30% grant from government up to a maximum of 1.5 million. And with the land bank supplying the entire 70% up to 5 million rands. We also have got medium-scale commercial farmers who will qualify for the portion of 50%. Grant, and the other loan component coming from the land bank will also be 50%. And lastly, our smallholder farmers will qualify for a 70% grant and a 30% loan.
All right, and have you identified the extent of the need? You did set aside, you said 2.5 billion rand, but if you look at the impact of not only load shedding, there is climate change, there's issue of pilferage, or, where farmers have a multitude of challenges that they're facing. What is the rationale, or rather the criteria, that you're looking at supporting farmers?
We are intensely looking at farmers who would have the greatest impact in terms of food security in our country. And we have identified those to be farmers who would be irrigating their lands. So your irrigation would be one of those that we'll be focusing on. We'll be focusing on intensive production systems like your poultry and your pig production. And we'll also be focusing on areas around your cold chain management or refrigeration, which will lead to food safety issues. So those are the 3 broad categories that we'd like to focus on in terms of food security and food safety.
And the impact of the fund, I know it's early days, I suppose, and if you were to look at issues of South Africa exporting maize or corn, for that matter, versus the food security that is required in the country, how then do you strike a balance in creating this alternative energy fund, ensuring that there's food security while also meeting the requirements with the trade agreements?
It's a very interesting question because what we are looking at is exactly the areas that you have highlighted. You would know that on a quarterly basis, we really ensure that we issue what we call crop estimates, where we say, where are we in terms of food security, especially for the staple grains that we are producing in our country. And at this moment, the last figures that we are having, we are still food secure. But what we intend doing is to ensure that we don't endanger that by not having electricity that is running through or energy that is running through to our areas where we irrigate. In terms of the trade that we are having, it's quite exciting that we are now currently starting to even have our maize being traded in China not so long ago. And even in the speech of the minister, she highlighted the grains that we have just exported to China. So that balance is what we are striking for.
Yes, and Director General, the thing about emerging farmers, you did mention that obviously you have to look at the scope and the size, the impact that that farming business has. You mentioned specifically in poultry and in fresh produce. Emerging farmers, are they being catered for, especially with the impact of load shedding on the sector?
Yes, your emerging farmers, especially those who fall within the smallholder farming community, would be catered for. And the terms would be quite affordable, I think, in terms of that. We will be giving 70% grant to smallholder farmers, and 30% would be a loan. On top of it, we are having a multiplicity of other interventions for smallholder farmers, where together with the provincial departments of agriculture, we are offering other grants to assist them in terms of production.
What is your view in the sense that sometimes the government is seen to be reacting or reactive to a situation and not necessarily thought through? Is this something that has been tested, especially best international practices on how how to mitigate the impact of a power supply insecurity?
I think it's a fair comment, but what we need to be looking at is what have we been given at this moment. You would recall that this is a time for us to deal with climate change in itself. We have got interventions that we are getting right through from the Paris Agreement and our own strategies that we are having in terms of climate adaptation, climate change adaptation, and also climate change mitigation. So there were interventions in terms of how do we look at the issues around energy. But the energy challenges that we are having in our country have just facilitated and fast-tracked what we want to see within the agricultural sector, having alternative energy sources within the sector, because this sector has got the ability to also generate energy. If you look at the sugar industry broadly, and what they do, the millers themselves can be also able to supply energy to the grid as an alternative stream for them to get some funding coming through.
Do you envisage that there may be a need to extend the fund or possibly even allocate more resources, considering that this power security situation that we have currently is intermittent and there's no end in sight, it seems?
I think there have been comments, and those comments also coming from the sector itself, indicating that we might just need to have more funding streaming in. But we note also the other areas that have been pronounced, especially by the Minister of Finance, in terms of incentives, in terms of the buyback bounce loans that we have in our sector. But we look forward that with funds permitting, we will be extending and ensuring that we sustain these alternative sources of energy in farming, because necessarily within our farming communities, we can be able to generate energy from other areas within the farm, like your bagasse and others, that we can utilize just for the farming sector.